Hey everybody, hope that everybody is doing well and as usual staying strong and staying safe. I'm going to get right to it today. I want to talk about a little bit about subclaims and analysis and then get into central claims, which we haven't discussed at all yet. And so hopefully this video will give you a better sense not only of subclaims and how they operate in our essays, and in terms of our support paragraphs, right? Our subclaims are geared for our support paragraphs or analysis paragraphs, means the same thing. And then a central claim, of course, is the primary argumentative statement of our essay. And it will come at the end of our introduction and have very specific things. It'll essentially announce your argument to your reader. So let me get right to it in the spirit of time and share my screen here. Give me 1 second. Okay. So just to sort of start us off and contextualize where we're at with the things that we've been working on. Um, Let me also put on captions here, actually, while I'm thinking of it. There we go. To contextualize things before we get started, and what I mean by contextualize things, I mean give us a little bit of a sense of where we're at in terms of our class and what we've done so far and where we're headed. Right, as you all know, we're headed towards writing our first workshop draft, which is the word that we use or the phrase that we use for the rough draft of our essay. We're not doing that until next week, but it will be the start of next week, and now is the time to start thinking about, if we haven't already, start thinking about how to develop these analysis and argumentative structures, these essay structures, as we move towards those papers. So in terms of context, okay, the M1 overview, it's a good idea to sort of remind ourselves, right, that what we're doing here is selecting a non-traditional story or narrative and analyze the message and effect we feel our selected story has upon its audience. So there's analysis. Analyze the effect that we feel it has upon its audience, as well as the consequence of that message, right? What is the consequence of that effect? And then make an argument, right? In these papers, these essays, we're always doing both those things. They are analytical arguments. So we're analyzing something and making an argument about what we see as the consequence and significance of that, of the message, in this case, of the non-traditional narrative. And make an argument about what we see as the larger significance of that message for our society, what we learn that is of importance from this new storytelling experience about a certain social issue. So the other thing that's part of that is finding a social issue. And we've talked a little bit about that. The social issues, I believe I said in my last video, are all about helping to focus our paper, right? So I'm going to analyze how, right, Inarritu's Carne Arena is teaching us something about um, bias against immigrants, or even racism, or a lack of empathy and a lack of compassion and a lack of understanding in relation to immigrants. So those social issues are what also help me to focus my essay. Obviously the actual non-traditional narrative is going to help me focus, but then so do the elements that I'm analyzing about my non-traditional narrative, but also the social issue helps me, right? So, I could look at Inarritu's, thing in terms of something else, right? And a different social issue. Maybe I want to talk about issues of like, um, international policy or something, who knows, or issues of sort of trauma and issues of violence or whatever it might be. That's going to be a slightly, at least, different analysis of that narrative. So far, these are things that we've been sort of swimming with, right? So selecting a narrative, right? Finding specific social issues, thinking about it in a message and effect of that message on the audience, and then thinking about the larger significance of that message, right? So these first three things are things that we have started to already engage with, right? Selecting a narrative, right, with our stories and roots discussion board and our discussions about what a non-traditional narrative is and spinning through different examples of that. Also started thinking about subclaims and what sort of elements I could look at in terms when we think about through the clouds, picking out an element and analyzing an element or two and analyzing my narrative in terms of that element and making sure that we have, so we're starting to understand that finding distinct elements in relation to my narrative. As far as social issues, we have been thinking about what do you feel like is the message, or what do you feel like is the moral of the story, if you will, or the message of the story in terms of a particular social issue. We've started to think a little bit about that. And also in terms of subclaims, we've thought about subclaims and elements and analytical points, which are covered in that worksheet, but we're obviously going to be talking about those things now and throughout the rest of the semester. So, in all, a sense of message and that, all those things are things that we've started to sort of explore. And that's why all these assignments and the work that you've done in these assignments and these discussion boards and so on and so forth are geared towards helping us write our essay, right? We're not just doing this work to sort of spin our wheels, right? The idea here is that there's a lot more that goes into writing an essay than just sitting down and actually writing an essay. It has a lot to do with pre-writing, these pre-writing activities. I don't really like to call them pre-writing activities because you're writing. So they're more like pre-essay activities, right? Critical thinking activities. And then we can get to a place where we can start thinking about central claim. As you can see, position, consequence, and significance will be some of the key aspects of that. So I want to return to subclaims a little bit here because that's the way that I think it's most effective to get to a central claim statement. And you've probably know this already and have experienced this before, that central claims can be really difficult to write. However, I think that difficulty stems from the idea that you need a lot of pieces. You need to know a lot of things before you can write an effective central claim. So I think by developing subclaims first, right, which are geared towards our analysis, we can start to develop an understanding of those things that we need to know so that we can write a stronger central claim statement. So as you notice, I had us begin with subclaims really as the focus. So if you haven't done so already, you're going to want to, I'm sorry, not as the focus. I've had us start with subclaims and thinking about essay structures. And the reason for that is because, like I said, it allows us, I believe, a little bit more of a kind of step-by-step process to building up towards a central claim instead of just going in cold. And if you haven't watched the two video clips, right, two video clips that are provided, you want to go ahead and do that now if you haven't done so already. One video clip is an analysis of a scene from Into the Spider-Verse, and another video clip is an analysis of a scene from Judas and the Black Messiah. You want to take a look at those now and then come back. And this will make a lot more sense if you do that. So the reason I put those two clips in there is because in those two clips, we have the sense of the directors and the cinematographers themselves sort of doing the activity that we did in Through the Clouds a little bit, which is to say they are starting to pick out different elements of their narrative or their film in this case. Both of these are films, and talk about them, right? So they aren't writing an essay, of course, they're just providing a kind of behind the scenes look, but they are being very analytical and they're doing so by gathering some elements, right? So if we look at pulling from the video, I just pulled some things from the video from Into the Spider-Verse, right? The director talks about Miles and the character and Uncle Aaron and Miles' father, uh, Jefferson Davis is his name, which I thought was interesting. Full disclosure, I haven't seen Into the Spider-Verse, and I would really like to, but I haven't seen it yet. But it's interesting that Miles' father's name is Jefferson Davis, who was the president of the Confederacy. I wonder if that was on purpose. I imagine it was way back when, or I don't know if Miles' father is a new character to the Spider-Man world. I'm not sure. I mean, I know that Miles is a new Spider-Man, but anyways, they talk about how the site in which the scene takes place has a history. So these ideas of the textures of hip hop music and a music video style. Um, they talk about spraying, this moment where they spray the camera in dots, the chromatic aberrations, the Kirby dots, imperfect comic printing techniques, really talking about the kind of formal aspects right there. Miles' own distinct universe is a phrase that gets said. And they also mention these sort of 2D comic graphics that come up in that scene. Now you'll notice that I've color coordinated these things with blue and purple, and you might be, why is he doing that? Because in some ways these things relate to, not in some ways, they relate to content and form, right? So, Miles, Uncle Aaron, Miles' father, those are all characters within um, Into the Spider-Verse, and that's the content of the film. while textures or spraying the camera in dots or the kind of 2D comic graphics, those are more related to form in relation to what is being described. Now, if we look at the video from Judas and the Black Messiah, right, we get some different kinds of elements. The director mentioned Shaka King, I think is his name, mentions that this is a scene from pretty early in the movie, early on in the movie. Then talks about the details of the blood dripping, the scene, and we sort of start from a camera angle of the character's foot and the blood dripping down. We don't know where it's coming from, right? And he mentions that this is kind of a time jump, right? We don't get much leading up to this scene. We just are sort of dropped in medias res. And he mentions this idea of putting you in the perspective of the person. And he also talks about sort of a kind of trying to avoid a kind of political apathy. I forget the exact phrase he uses, but it's essentially a sort of political indifference or political apathy, where he says, if you stand for nothing, you will fall for nothing. Danger of being apolitical. Um, and then he also sort of, we see in that clip the assassination questions that he talks about, right? When the FBI agent is asking um, um, the guy he's interrogating, asking him, did you care about the assassination of MLK? Did you care about the assassination of Malcolm X? And then it gives this kind of quick smile, right? This very specific detail that Shaka King points out. And then he closes by talking about the close up, the kind of pleading look that the character has at the end of the scene. Now, so we're getting both a kind of what we're seeing here is sort of these directors or the cinematographers begin to analyze their own creations. So it's not like you have to find this, right? The idea is that we're doing this, right? As critical thinkers and as writers, we're going to go in just like we have before, and like we did with Through the Clouds. You're going to go into your narrative and try and pull as many elements as we can. And that way I'll have that much more material to analyze, right? So notice how much stuff these, we're getting out of just these 2-minute clips. A lot. So anyways, what else we get here though that should be noted is that well, actually, let me move towards sort of talking a little bit about these elements and how they relate to subclaims. So I'm going to take just these sort of elements that got talked about from the Into the Spider-Verse video, bring them into um, their own sort of slide here, and do what we did in relation to finding, a kind of fact idea list or an elements and analytical points list, a kind of subclaim chart, right? And this is one of those pre-writing or pre-essay activities that I think is crucial to do and something that I highly recommend you do before you get much further towards like, oh, trying to develop a central claim. I would do this first. And that first thing is going through your narrative, like I said, and pulling out as many elements as you can, whether or not you feel like you have something to say about them. Then sort of putting them in a chart like this, a kind of 2-column chart. On the left, you're just going to list all those elements, right? The facts of what is there in terms of the narrative, whether it's content based or form based, doesn't really matter. I'm going to list those facts. And on the right-hand column, I'm going to sort of list the analytical points, or I'm going to develop the analytical points, I should say. And if you remember from our subclaim sheet, analytical points have 2 parts to them. They have a sense of an effect and a sense of consequence. And this is really all about, a kind of cause and effect structure here. Something in the film is affecting the audience and teaching them something, right? So that's effect and consequence. So that's essentially the structure of a subclaim, right? And the subclaim, we should have a subclaim as the very first sentence of any of our support paragraphs, right? Or analysis paragraphs, same thing. So taking a look here, Miles, Uncle Aaron, Miles' father, we have this idea of the kind of family structure of the characters in the film. So I don't know, for me, how does this affect the audience? Well, it really gives them a sense of the importance of family. And then why does that matter? What's the importance of family? What do you feel? What do I feel, right? I'm interpreting here. Notice that in the column on the right, these aren't facts. These are my interpretations. This is the way I see it. You could see it totally different. And that's the point of critical analysis, is that you're providing your own perspective, your own interpretation. So I feel it affects the audience by giving them a sense of the importance of family. And this really connects to the importance of and the value of ethics and honoring or mentoring and striving through trauma, right? Those are the things I'm thinking about. So if you haven't seen, I don't want to give any spoilers away, and I haven't even seen the film, but um, there's trauma within Miles's family. I'll just say that. So that's where I'm making those connections. I read the plot and everything, so I spoiled it for myself. Now, let's say the site has history. Some of my elements I might have any ideas for. Like, you know what? I don't know. I realize that that graffiti site is the site that is where I think Miles discovers an important part of the plot. But let's say I come to across an element I don't really know it. That's fine. Move on to another one. Okay. So the textures of hip hop music, the music video style. What is that? What is the effect for me? It connects the film to hip hop culture, right, and therefore to Black culture, to African American culture. And for me, the value of this is that it's values Black history, and it also connects to a new generation, right, a new audience, right. Spider-Man and hip hop, I would say, certainly aren't things that have been connected in previous Spider-Man versions, films, and comic books. But here we get that new connection, and that I think connects to a new generation, and also kind of represents a connection to a sort of Black history, or bringing Black history into the Spider universe, the Spider-Verse, if you will. Now, as far as spraying the camera in dots, so I feel like maybe this is, they talk about, I think his name was Jack Kirby, maybe I could be wrong about that, but this comic artist, connecting to a kind of comic history, so that has the effect on the audience. So I feel like tipping their cap to a whole history of comics, but then really sort of making African Americans a part of that comic history, diversifying comics, right? We talked a little bit about in relation to Black Panther how people of color haven't been really represented in comics, from comics of yesterday, if you will, through comic history. It's not that they don't completely exist, but that it was very much a white dominant, and you can certainly see it as being a very white dominant medium, and even male dominant. It's not to say that there aren't women, of course, there's plenty of female superheroes, but most of the major superheroes that we think of are male, despite recent efforts to really sort of foreground female superheroes like Wonder Woman and otherwise. So, but here I would say that African Americans is part of that comic history, connecting to that. So something that's important to notice here is that I'm starting to interpret the film, right? I'm taking just the facts of the film in the left-hand column here, and I'm starting to interpret, not only thinking about what is the effect on the audience of these various aspects of it, these elements of it, but also interpreting what I think they mean. So when I go to develop a subclaim, right, again, not a central claim, but a subclaim for a support paragraph in my paper, I'm going to bring this all together. So the family history and relationships of Into the Spider-Verse, so that's the element, right, the top element, emphasize the importance of lineage and support, especially in BIPOC communities, to help individuals overcome racist trauma and find their voice. So it's not like it happens that quick, but once I have these pieces, right, I'm taking the sort of top element and the top analytical point, the effect and consequence, and putting them together. And you can notice then I can start developing more, a stronger subclaim. And I have something to say in that support paragraph, something to write about. So I can talk about Miles, right, his uncle Aaron, Miles's father, and the relationships with all three of those characters. And I'm not sure about Miles's mother or, extended family otherwise. I haven't seen the film, but those are things that I could bring in, right? And I'm going to make the point about how this is emphasizing the importance of lineage and support, and then also to have a consequence of individuals overcoming a racist trauma and find their voice. We see in that scene alone how Miles's uncle is taking him to this subway to, let him blow off steam, or, get rid of the pressure that he's feeling, right? So that's a kind of mentoring, um, you know. So then I develop that subclaim, and then I can develop the other two that I have here, and then 3, 4. When it comes to our papers, we're probably only going to need about 3 analysis paragraphs, so 3 strong subclaims, and I'm good to go. The other thing to notice here, though, is that I'm also starting to connect to these social issues. Most of the social issues that, even if I hadn't, let's say I have a list of like 15 different elements, and then I've written about, 15 different analytical points, excuse me, I'm going to try and identify, do I seem to be talking about a similar issue in a lot of these? And if that's the case, then that's maybe the issue that I want to come at. I want to come at my narrative with. So here I'm obviously talking about race, Black empowerment of a new generation. Those are some of the key issues, or the key issue that I think is being developed in this paper. And that's going to help me as I go into developing my central claim. So when it comes to the central claim statement, it's first important to sort of break down what are the key components of it. First of all, it has a focus, right? So the focus in this case is whatever you're analyzing. In this case, we're analyzing a non-traditional narrative. So I'm analyzing in this example Into the Spider-Verse. And it's also going to provide your readers with a sense of your position. You should have a sense after you read the central claim or my central claim what I'm trying to argue, right? Do I feel like Into the Spider-Verse is doing something valuable, or do I feel like it's doing something problematic? So those are things, the position is something that's key. This will usually come forward, the position, with the verbs that we use, or the adverbs, and you'll see how that plays out. We also want a sense of consequence. What do I feel is the effect, the overall effect of Into the Spider-Verse on the audience? What is it teaching them about a particular social issue? Or what message is it sending about a particular social issue? And then finally, a sense of larger significance. So why does this matter? What is the larger social impact or value upon the social issue? What does this do in terms of race relations in our society, or issues and ethics surrounding race? So those are those kind of four pieces. The first two are relatively easy: focus, position. Consequence and significance, it gets a little more difficult. But those things are easy to deal with, like I said, once I've developed a sense of those subclaims. Now you'll notice that the role of the center claim is to propose the argument of a critical analysis in a concise statement. So no more than 3 sentences. You want to keep it nice and concise. It should be a nice snapshot, if you will. At the end of your introduction is where you want that center claim statement to come in. That's not always the case in every single paper, but for the length of the papers that we're writing in this class, you should have your central claim at the end of the introduction. Um, how does the central claim relate to the subclaims? Well, I've talked about that a little bit already, but here you can kind of get a sense. At the end of my introduction, I'm going to have the central claim, and then it's going to be the umbrella sort of argument that sort of holds all the subclaims. So let's say I had 4 different analysis paragraphs in my essay. I'm going to have 4 different subclaims, and they all fit beneath the larger central claim statement. Hence the name subclaim, right? Subclaim, the prefix sub means beneath, like a submarine that goes beneath the water. Subclaim 1, 2, 3, 4, all those subclaims are beneath the larger argument of the central claim. So structurally, that's how a central claim and a subclaims relate to one another. Now, sort of giving you a chart, and this is going to look a little crazy, of how do we get there, right? How do we get to a central claim? And I've sort of talked about that a little bit already, right? We're going to do all these pre-essay activities that we've been doing for this first couple weeks of the semester. And that's going to lead us to finding a sort of focus, right? And once I have that focus, I'm going to start pulling elements and perhaps developing subclaims about those things, in connection with analytical points. And then from those subclaims, I'm probably going to get a sense of the issue that I think I want to write about in relation to my focus. I'm going to probably get a sense of what my position is. What do I think the film, the non-traditional narrative, in this case, Into the Spider-Verse, is doing? What kind of message it's sending? Is this something valuable or important? And I have a sense of consequence, right? What is the consequence of it? What is this doing? And then once all that's in place, my life becomes a little bit easier when it comes to actually writing that central claim statement. So let's get right into central claim. So what I like to do after I've done that stuff, I start with the elements, the analytical points, and start developing subclaims. Then I like to try and write just a sort of what I call a working central claim, or a driving statement, right? Or an argumentative statement, which is to say, I put it in first person because it comes out easier, I think, that way. When we actually revise our finalized central claim, we want to avoid the first person in the central claim statement. We'll talk about that later. But so I like to just write a statement of what I'm trying to do. I'm analyzing how Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is asking African Americans to rise above racism. Okay. So it's a very simplistic statement. This is the kind of, but it has a sense, right, of both a sense of my focus and my position. So here's those 4 core things from the central claim. I'm just going to sort of put them at the bottom of the slide here. And so I have a sense of my focus. Yes, check. Do I have a sense of the consequence of it? It's asking African Americans to rise above racism. Yes, I also have a sense of my position a little bit in terms of I think that Into the Spider Verse is doing something important, though I'm not really taking a strong stance, right? I'm saying is asking. So does it actually do it? Your reader is probably saying to themselves, well, do you feel like it actually gets African Americans to rise above racism? Um, so by the time I'm done with all my revisions, right, and this might be, even after my workshop draft, ideally I want to be in a place where I have a full sense of all these things, a strong sense. So Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse focus powerfully demands that. So notice how that's a much stronger verb, is asking. Stronger position powerfully demands that the new generation of African Americans rise above the trauma and legacy of racism. So I have that sense of consequence, the overall message and overall effect. Okay, why does this matter? So what? So we can develop a more unified and humane racial ethics in America. So there we have, that's obviously a much more developed statement than I started with. But the point is, you got to start somewhere. So I think it's good. We talked about starting with the subclaims first, but then with the central claim, starting with a kind of driving statement, and then we can sort of develop from there. But how do we do that? So that's the next thing we want to think about. So if I have my kind of driving statement or my initial sort of first person, if you will, argumentative statement about how Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is asking African Americans to rise above racism, I want to go back to those four core aspects and start asking myself questions about how I can strengthen each area. So the focus I don't really need to strengthen. I mean, the focus is clear. Okay. And I have a sense of the issue, right? The issue in terms of racism, right? But my position, I can make my position stronger, and we saw this in the last slide by strengthening the kind of verb and or adverb. So powerfully demands as opposed to just asking. That has a stronger sort of push to it, takes a stronger position than just is asking. The other thing with the consequences, I can make my consequence stronger with further details under context. So I added some context, or I'm going to be. I think it's really appealing to the new generation of African Americans. Rise above, I already had there, but that's a good, nice, distinct term. Trauma, I was thinking that the trauma of racism might be another way to make that stronger. So those are some key ideas or terms, some further detail that I'm going to bring in terms of the message and consequence of that message on the social issue. And then finally, with a larger significance, and I want to sort of put an asterisk here and say that usually the larger significance is not something, the consequence of significance are things that usually I don't really strengthen and develop once I've done some writing. Once I've written a few support paragraphs, then I say to myself, okay, I think I know where I'm going with this, right? So, but in particular, the significance is something that tends to come like last. So, developing a sense of significance by showing larger importance. Why does it matter that the film is demanding this rising above racism? Why does this matter from a larger social perspective? Well, that matters because it has, I think, it would create a more ethical society in terms of race relations, a more humane society. So, those are some of the concepts I feel that it could come into play, right? So let's sort of come back again. I'm analyzing how Spider-Man and the Spider-Verse is asking African Americans to rise above racism. Once I start integrating those ideas of the consequence and significance and strengthening the support, right, I can move beyond the kind of simplistic version, which is just a statement to get me going, the driving statement, and get to this more full and more complete central claim statement. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse powerfully demands that the new generation of African Americans rise above the trauma and legacy of racism so we can develop a more unified and humane racial ethics in America. So you might wonder yourself when you read some of these central claims, like, whoa, that's a mouthful. It's a lot. Where did that come from? It's because it's a lot of thought and a lot of work has been put into those statements. It's not like, we don't sit down and just write that out. That's a lot of thought, a lot of thinking, a lot of revising that has gone into a statement to have a full idea, right? Not a sense of just what is happening, but why it matters, right? And what is the larger significance of that thing, or what the message is, what the consequences of the message, and what is the larger significance of that. That's a much more full and complete statement than just say even a subclaim, right? So here we have that focus, we have that stronger position, we have that stronger sense of message and consequence, and then we have that larger sense of significance. right? Why this matters in the long run. So that's really what the central claim is about. And I'm not saying that, well, this all happens so easily. No, this takes time. And that's why our class is structured the way it is. And this certainly will not be the last time we talk about these things. So one thing you can do is to go back, like I said, go back to some of these pre-essay activities if you're really struggling and try and identify things where social issues are coming up or where, elements are coming up and pull those out. Use those. All those activities that we've done in terms of the discussion boards and otherwise are there for you to use for your own developing your essay. So Peele's film Get Out brings up questions within ourselves. Who do we, this is from a couple of just excerpts from our Through the Clouds discussion. So the students writing about the film Get Out brings up questions within ourselves. Who do we represent? What do we stand for? Sometimes us, not all, have a tendency to feel so comfortable that we ignore others' issues. It may not be relatable to us, so we just let it be instead of learning from it. And here we get this kind of sense of these issues of we don't really necessarily have a completely specific social issue, but we do have this sort of problem, right? Where this author is saying, we tend to sort of not, we tend to ignore people, to ignore others' issues, right? We have too much we have a lack of compassion in our society. We have a lack of empathy, right? And maybe this isn't particularly the case when it comes to issues of race. So then, though this is just a discussion board post and an excerpt at that from a discussion board post, we start to get a sense of a kind of argument. We get to start to get a sense of some issues. Yes, they need to be pulled out. They need to be developed. But a lot of times I can go back to my writing and I can start to see the things that sort of gravitate towards, yes, elements like we talked before, but here we're talking about things like social issues and argumentative approach that is also in that writing, even though that wasn't maybe top of mind. So another one, Polo G's song Wishing for a Hero talks about how living in the hood messed with Polo G's mental health and how police kill or heavily prosecute black men without taking into consideration the environment they were forced to grow up in. So here we get some couple of interesting issues and how they kind of intersect, right? This idea of mental health, right? But also this kind of bias against black men in particular, right, by law enforcement, and perhaps stereotypes that some might hold that lead towards police officers acting in brutal or discriminatory or violent ways or biased ways when it comes to black men. A lack of understanding also about mental health issues as they transpire in hoods or in working class, lower class communities, impoverished communities, and how those things need to be sort of all brought together and understood better if we're going to have less racism, particularly in our justice system and our law enforcement process. So that stuff's there, right? The kind of seeds, if you will, are there in terms of the work that we've already done with these discussion boards. Now I need to start bringing it out. Yes, in terms of elements, like we talked about already, and analytical points for subclaims, but also in terms of the issues and a kind of argumentative approach. So if we go back, lastly, just to finish up here, if we go back to that kind of crazy slide from earlier on with the central claim, hopefully it makes a little bit more sense and the kind of context and process that we're engaging in here. So, the central claim having those four aspects to it: focus, position, consequence, significance, and then how we get there, right? Well, we've been in the process of getting there so far. It's important to sort of understand that, recognize that, so you can take advantage of and make use of the things that we've already done. So those pre-writing activities, the way we found narrowed down to a focus of a non-traditional narrative, started to identify some elements, analytical points. That's something maybe I want to go do more of before I just dive in on central claim. Develop those subclaims, write them out, maybe even write out a few of those analysis paragraphs based on those subclaims. And then I start to realize, okay, this is where I'm coming at in terms of the narrative, right? Are these issues or this issue, this is my position on it, this sense of consequence, and then I'll have more of the kind of ammunition, more of the sort of material that I need when it comes to trying to write a central claim statement. And the idea isn't to have a perfect central claim statement in your workshop draft, right? That's what a draft is for, a rough draft is for, is to sort of put down what we have, start to get those those structures in place of an analytical argumentative essay, but we're obviously going to build on those going forward. All right, so that's just the first kind of introduction to, if you will, central claim statements. A lot more to come. So hopefully this gives you some idea of not only the things that we've been doing and how they, kind of serve as the kind of scaffolding up to writing an essay, but also the things you want to think about when it comes to finally developing that central claim statement. In the meantime, uh, keep up the energy and effort, right? This is our first essay. It's our least heavily weighted essay of the semester, and that's on purpose. The idea is that we better understand these structures as we go from module to module to module, right? So that our second essay will be a little stronger perhaps than our first, ideally, and our third the stronger even than our second. So the idea isn't to sort of completely understand these things out of the gate. The idea is to take what you can, understand what you can, work with the process, and start to develop and build your understanding of subclaims, central claims, and as we will see, analysis paragraphs, introductions, so on and so forth as we go forward. All right, everybody, take care.